Welcome everybody to today's talk. One of the things that I've been reflecting on over the past few days is the fact that it seems to be the case that we feel that we are living in unprecedentedly difficult or challenging times. Now, the truth of the matter is that we don't really know whether that's the case. We don't know what it was like to feel and to live 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago or 200 years ago. But putting that aside, it certainly feels that in recent times, there are so many things or so many more things that we are aware of in the world that cause suffering, whether it be the fact that we are altering our environment, regardless of whether one feels into climate change or not. The fact we are altering our environment, the fact that we are poisoning our environment, the fact that we are one of the first generations that truly, undoubtedly knows this to be the case. The fact that we see the presentation of war and destruction and suffering in so many different places around the world, maybe very close to home and maybe very far away from where we live. And this is all amplified by the fact that we live in a 24/7 media environment, which has been exacerbated, we might say, in terms of our ability to connect to these things through tools such as computers and smartphones and social media and so forth. And what we found through a combination of our own innate state in relation to how we crave information and we crave distraction, combined with the intelligent programming, shall we say, of some of these apps and platforms, is that more and more of us are spending more and more time in connection to these platforms, which bring us, in so many cases, the news of negativity, the news of all the challenges around the world, the news of all the suffering. And so for that reason alone, it is understandable that in this day and age, our mental health is something that can become so fragile. Because if we're not careful, it's so easy for us to become completely snowed in by, caught up with the news of everything that is going on around us. And it's important also to mention that not only are we caught up in it, but we are caught up in very certain narratives around those things, which generally tend to err towards the negative, towards the shocking, towards essentially attracting our attention, because that is ultimately the nature of these platforms and businesses, is to engage, attract our eyeballs, and to maintain engagement. So we're not necessarily even consuming, in pretty much all cases, the reality of what is going on. But what we are consuming is generally a diet that can very easily lead us into a place of negativity, into a space of despondency, into a place of feeling hopeless and helpless. And as a result of that, our mental health can suffer. And just to be clear, that when I talk about mental health, I'm just talking about, at the moment, just simply the ability to maintain mental equanimity and balance in our lives so that we are able to be a reasonable human being to those around us, to be in a reasonable state, to be in a reasonable mood, to be peaceful as possible, to be as kind as possible, and so on. But what happens is that when we get drawn into these negative patterns, and when we only see the world through those stories, when we only see the world as that which is being presented to us on these platforms, it's very easy for us to detach from the reality of things, to detach from the nature of who we are ultimately, beyond all the stories and beyond all the thoughts. And we can end up in pretty bad places. And so what is the purpose of this talk today, of this video, is I just wanted to suggest 3 or 4 things that I personally find super helpful in terms of maintaining that balance, in terms of ensuring that I don't get too dragged into the narrative that is being perpetuated in any given moment, and that I'm able to try to find some form of peace on a day-to-day basis in order to go through my daily existence. So the first point, and we're not going to go into the practices around each of them, although some of them are quite obvious in terms of what needs to be done. So the first one is to have a daily practice. And what I mean by that, it might be an asana or yoga practice on the mat. It might be a meditation practice. It might be a breathing practice. It might be a chanting practice. It might be whatever it might be, is to have some form of practice that is a space where you consciously practice letting go of external distraction, of circular thoughts. And we focus on the breath, or we focus on a picture of a deity, or we focus on a feeling inside of us, or we focus on some kind of object or a candle flame or whatever it might be. But the practice is working to let go of where our attention wanders to in terms of the mind, and we just feel inside, and through that gradually we allow ourselves to release tension. We detach slightly from our grasping of these stories, the grasping of these narratives, and the prominence that they play in our moment-to-moment life. So over the long term, that is what all of these practices are doing, is helping to center and ground our attention inwards, and to therefore be able to respond more intelligently, more wisely, we might say, to the stimuli that are coming from all of these different platforms and all of the different places that we might engage in any given day. So that's the first one, is just simply having a practice. The second one, again, seems so obvious, but it just seems so hard for many of us to do, which is that just don't read as much news and don't look at that content on the social media platforms that you know is going to put you into that place. From personal experience, I think 5 years ago now, I decided to have a 1-month social media fast, which basically involved deleting all of social media from my phone and from my laptop and not using it for a month. And now 5 years later, I haven't stopped that fast. So I haven't been on social media. I haven't had the apps for 5 years now. Yes, I'm on this YouTube channel, but that's it. And in addition to that, I deliberately limit the amount of news that I consume. So a maximum of looking online at the newspapers once a week, at an absolute maximum. And sometimes I actually do it even less than that. So staying informed in a relative way, but in a much, much more restricted manner. And what I found over the period of time that I've been doing this, which, as I said, is 4 or 5 years, is I just feel a whole lot calmer. Yes, I'm definitely not the cool kid anymore, not that I ever was. I definitely don't know about a ton of stuff and the things that are going on in social media and the little stories that break in the news day to day. But has that really affected the quality of my life? Well, actually, not only has it not affected the quality of my life, I actually feel it's improved the quality of my life. So it doesn't mean that we don't need to know what's going on, but it does mean that we limit the amount of time we spend consuming that diet of information. Because remember that what we consume, whether it be food or whether it be media, whether it be films, whether it be news, whether it be music, shapes the way we feel and the way we think and the way that we perceive. So if we surround ourselves the whole time with negative news, that is the perspective that we're going to have. So number 2 is trying to maintain some balance with our use of social media, and also in terms of the way that we consume news in general. So that's 2. The third one is to see if we can cultivate on a daily basis a practice of gratitude. And what that means, simply, it can either be in the journal form, or it can just be simply sitting in a position like this, for example, or even just sitting on a couch or lying in bed. And every morning or every evening, just thinking about and feeling into 3 things that we can feel grateful for in our lives at this time. So it's not just about recalling something that we feel grateful for. It might be our partner, it might be a child, it might be a plant in the room, it might be the way that the light looks today, it might be for our health, it might be for a visit we had from a friend, whatever it might be. Try to feel into and cultivate that feeling of gratitude within you. So it's not just a thought, it becomes a visceral feeling that emanates or radiates into your body. And spend a little bit of time with each one of those 3 areas of gratitude that you feel on that given day. And the reason that this is important is, again, in the same way that we don't want to consume too much negativity, because that shapes the way that our mind perceives. If we can actually begin to look at things from the perspective of gratitude, we also start to see that there are many, many things in our immediate experience of our life that we can feel grateful for, that we can feel positive about. And that also can help to shift our mindset. And it's worth mentioning this story, and I think I'll probably finish here. I think 3 is good for today, so the video doesn't go on for too long. But as some of you know, I spent 10 years living in Nigeria, and it was in Nigeria that I started my relationship with yoga, and I began teaching and sharing these practices. And a few years ago, I was running a course for teenage girls who had been internally displaced. They were refugees in their own country. And I was working through another organization, a charity, that was working with them to support them because they'd come from the north of Nigeria, were now living on the outskirts of Lagos in very, very, what we might call in the West, very dire conditions. And I was asked to come and give a series of classes over 6 weeks, introducing them to the practices of yoga. And I was very, very keen to do this course, but at the same time, I was concerned because it's all well and good for us privileged people, if you like, to be sitting in our homes and doing all of these practices and thinking, oh, it's making me peaceful and so forth. But I wondered, would it actually work dealing with people who really were in critical situations, very, very marginalized, very few resources, having to walk for miles every day to get clean water, not necessarily knowing if they were going to eat more than once a day, and so forth. And what I asked them to do on the first day is, for the 6 weeks of the course, in the morning, is to do this gratitude practice. 3 things, feel into them, same thing every day. They agreed to do it. Well, what I found after 6 weeks, when we had our final session, I said, okay, who would like to share their experience of the gratitude practice that I asked you to do right at the beginning of the course? And so many of these young beings, with a smile on their face and almost like a twinkling in their eyes, said, well, I started the practice, and to be honest with you, when you first talked about it, I was a bit cynical and I really didn't think it was going to work. However, now I'm sitting here 6 weeks later, having practiced this every day, and even though I see that the material circumstances of my life may appear to be quite difficult, I've realized that I've got so much to be grateful for around me, whether it be my relationships with my friends and my family, or just the little things that happen each day that bring a smile to my face. And what I realized in that moment is that if that gratitude practice can work in that situation, there really are very few situations where potentially it wouldn't work. So I hope that helps to inspire you in your own case, in your own situation, to try and adopt that practice, because I've seen firsthand, and also in my own practice, how much that can bring benefit to our mindset. So to summarize, there are those 3 things that we can do in order to try to minimize the effects of the 24/7 media narrative that we are so often immersed in. And not only just to detach from it, but actually to do things that bring us back to our basic essence of beingness, like the breathing practices, the chanting, the movement practices, and so on. The turning down the volume of some of those platforms. And then finally, the gratitude practice, so that we can begin to see, well, actually, as much as there is a lot of suffering going on in the world, at the same time as this suffering, I can also see that there are so many positive things that I can be grateful for. And by bringing ourselves into a better headspace, we are in such a much better space, if you like, not just to support ourselves, but to support all those around us in need. So please do reflect on that. See if you can bring some of those practices into your day-to-day lives. Thank you for being here today. If you like the content, please do like the video or subscribe so you can be informed when I put up new videos. Thanks again. See you soon. Namaste.